I'm Jackie Lucky, your Financial Planning Maestro. This series of podcasts is aimed at financial planning professionals and also those who are looking to enter the financial planning profession. We will be talking during the podcast about all things Certified Financial Planner certification related, talking to other CFPs around the world, and also we will be dropping in on some new entrants who've just entered the financial planning profession, and we'll be checking up along the way on a regular basis with them to see how they're getting on. I hope you enjoy today's podcast. Hello and welcome. I'm Jackie Lucky, your Financial Planning Maestro. And today I have another fantastic guest, somebody who has recently passed their Certified Financial Planner certification, and that is Alasdair Walker from Handford, Aitkenhead and Walker. Welcome, Alasdair.
Hi, Jackie. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Now, we are just going to dive straight in because I've got lots of interesting things to ask you about, all about your journey to CFP, about why you decided to do the CFP, and also, you had some issues along the way. So just to try and get to the bottom of what happened and how you felt. And then finally, we're just going to look at some tips and things, any tips and tricks that you could pass on to everybody else who's going to be starting their level 7 journey in November this year.
Absolutely.
So first of all, tell us about how you came across the CFP and why you decided that you wanted to go through that process and become a certified financial planner in the UK.
Yeah, so an interesting question. I was thinking about this actually the other day. I sit on a practitioner panel for the Personal Finance Society, and I guess kind of ironically, I was first started thinking about the CFP in a serious way when I joined that panel, which was about 3 years ago. On the panel were a number of people who've been former CFP assessors or involved what was the IFP previously. And there was a lot of discussion about how the financial planning education at the PFS was a big shortcoming, and that really the gold standard in the UK was the CFP. And I'd come across it previously. I'd heard others talking about it. I'd never really looked into it seriously. Trying to get any information out of the CISI had proven challenging, to put it kindly. And I'd not really looked much further. I've spent a career doing CII-based exams with the PFS, and was chartered and a fellow, and felt I was at the pinnacle of exam success. And I thought, well, we're doing financial planning, what I believe to be good quality financial planning with all clients. So we were at that stage. We'd just kind of transitioned from a more traditional sort of product-focused model to that full financial planning model. I'd managed that transition in our business, and I thought, well, let's get some third-party ratification about what we're doing. So that was it. It was coming from this panel, hearing people who I really respected and trusted, experts in the field, saying this is the qualification that shows your financial planning mettle, really.
Yeah. And I guess it's that application of knowledge, isn't it, that starts to come through. That's what you start to need to apply when you're going through that case study creation and the assessment process. Yeah,
definitely. It's interesting. I've heard the CFP sort of compared to the sort of body of technical exams as a sort of a contrast. It's technical over here and then it's CFP over here. But I think there is an awful lot of assumed technical knowledge in the syllabus.
Yes.
And I think anybody who thought, oh, well, I'm not the most technical of people, but I'm going to go and have a go at the CFP anyway, would find themselves struggling.
Yes, definitely. Because it's about, I always talk to people about this kind of giant 3D jigsaw puzzle that you're trying to build when you're going through your case study to build that financial plan. And you need that level of technical knowledge to be able to apply it to build that giant jigsaw puzzle, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always sort of thought of financial planning as a spider's web, because every time you pull on one strand, it messes up something somewhere else and affects all the others around it. So yeah, definitely, it's that kind of thing. But you definitely need that technical ability to be able to apply it.
And so you embarked on the new level 7 launched by the CISI, coming up to 2 years ago now, and the new pathway that's gone in. So you sat the level 6 exam, yes?
That's right. Yeah, we did that in March 2020. Just got in before national lockdowns. In fact, I distinctly remember having a bit of a debate with my co-director who did it with me on the train on the way back about how serious COVID was going to be, and I was there going, it's just a problem in the Far East, it's never going to make it over here, and how wrong I was.
Yeah, indeed. I think you were very fortunate to be able to get that exam in. I can also remember thinking at the time, we thought that COVID at the CISI wasn't going to be around that long. And, little did we know as well. I think most people were caught unawares of the seriousness of it.
Exactly.
But yeah, so tell us about the exam itself. How did the whole experience of the exam compare perhaps to some of the chartered exams that you've sat with the CII previously?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's interesting, actually. I think the exam, in some ways, the exam was very interesting because it was the first exam that I've come across in that sit down, write some, bullet pointed answers format that attempted to get across what we actually do with clients. So there was an element of actual practical experience in there. I think it suffers because it's a very wide syllabus, because you basically are testing elements of the technical knowledge needed for an entire financial planning process. Yes. But it's necessarily then also very shallow. So wide and shallow by comparison to a very typical technical exam, and I'm used to the ones from the CII, but I'm sure CC's wealth management exams are similar, that tend to be very narrow syllabuses, but quite deep. And so this wide, shallow approach was new to me. I didn't feel like I'd applied myself very hard to the exam, to the study for it. I think, on the other hand, of course, there's a decade's worth of having done the job. So that's some application there and lots of exams in the background. But what I would say is it didn't in the least bit prepare me for what the case study was going to look like. I was there thinking, oh, wow, that's quite easy. I think I got a merit, for the exam. And I was like, I didn't have to try too hard on that. That was pretty good.
This level 7 log is going to be fine.
Yeah, again, the theme, I think, along this discussion is going to be that I'm wrong quite a lot.
Well, we all have our moments. Yeah, well, we're entitled to be wrong every now and again. That's absolutely fine. But so, coming out of the exam, you felt confident in passing, and then obviously you did pass. So congratulations on that, belated congratulations. And then did you decide to take a break, or did you dive straight in and pick up the level 7 case study?
Pretty much went straight in for the case study. I think I signed up for whatever the next timing schedule was.
Yeah.
The results of the exam were quite delayed, and then we also had the overlay of everything going on with COVID. And so I think in the end, I sat down to work on the first case study in December. I seem to remember it was December 2020, and in fact, no, it may well have been the autumn. But anyway, whenever it was, I sat down and I thought, well, maybe I should get some help with this. And I looked for, there's one course authorised as being an appropriate course for it, which is the FP Training Academy. I think Steve's been a recent guest.
Steve, yeah.
And Steve Martin. And I rang him up and said, Steve, when are you next running the course? And he said, I've just run it last week. You missed it. So we had about an hour on the phone. Steve very kindly had a chat with me about sort of the main issues to hit. And I had decided I was going to apply the financial planning methodology and approach that we do in the office, because the original objective had been to sort of ratify what we were doing. Yeah. And so I started off with a similar kind of reporting structure. I started off with we use Voyant, other cash flow software is available, and I thought I'm going to do this using cash flow forecasting software. I'm going to do this using our report structure. That was my first submission. I also got in touch with 3 or 4 of the pilot pilot case study sort of assessees.
Yes.
So I sort of trawled Twitter and looked on LinkedIn and got in touch with contacts and worked out 3 or 4 people who'd passed the pilot round, and managed to persuade all of them to give me a little bit of their time, talk to them about it. 2 or 3 of them had used cash flow forecasting software, commercially available stuff, to do their submissions. I was like, right, that's a good sign. It's possible. And I went away and did that.
Okay. And how much time did you spend constructing your plan, using Voyant to construct your financial plan, roughly?
It's hard to specify. I mean, it's funny, your CPD log, you always got to put down a number of hours, and they always seem to be very rounded, don't they?
Yeah.
50 hours of this, 60 hours of that, whatever else. I'd say it was probably 3 good weekends worth of work. Of going through it, of building the plan, of trying to pull out the learning outcomes within the existing report structure that I was using. And of course that led to challenges, because you're, with the benefit of hindsight, you're asking the examiner to hunt around for the marks rather than giving the marks to the examiner on the plate. And the irony is that I'm quite often sought out by people to give exam help, exam technique help, that sort of thing. I'm reasonably well known for being fairly successful within the sort of context of professional exams, and I give that advice to people.
Yes, but you didn't do it yourself.
No, and it was a classic case of where we'd started from. The starting objective was to kind of have what we were doing ratified. And I didn't stop and think, hang on, does this match the structure that they're asking for? Yeah. And in fact, of course, there is a structure recommendation. Learning outcome 4.4.1 gives you a structure to use.
Yes, it does indeed. Yeah.
So that was staring me right in the face. But I just kind of ploughed on ahead regardless, trying to do it my own way.
Okay, so after spending 60-ish hours ploughing on, you submitted it and...
Yeah, so submitted it. I didn't really know how to feel about it. I was... my colleague had done something similar, but he'd then identified, he'd looked through the exemplar case study, which has all sorts of challenges, but he'd looked through that and he'd realised that that a lot of the tables were very specific in a way that Voyant doesn't output by default. So he then spent a weekend converting all the Voyant outputs into the format he thought the examiner wanted.
Okay.
And I hadn't done that, so I was thinking, oh gosh, okay, maybe I'm going to lose a few points there. But I was fairly confident in the work that I'd done. I got 32%. It was the lowest exam mark I've had since I got an E in my mock maths AS level.
Wowee. That's
actually,
great.
that was probably a higher mark. I think an E probably is a higher mark than 32%. Anyway, it was pretty abysmal. It's fair to say.
Gosh, and I guess after spending 60 hours on it, you were feeling pretty frustrated. And what did the feedback look like for you? How did you feel when you got the feedback?
It's a little bit like the 5 stages of grief. I think I pretty much went through every one of them. So you've got denial first. No, this is just wrong. They must have sent me the wrong one. Then anger. I spent quite a long time in anger.
I think we spoke when you were in the anger bit.
Yeah, I think we did. And I still, and this is easy for me to say, but I still think that a portion of that anger was justified, for all sorts of reasons. I think that the process could be explained far better. I think the expectations weren't clear. I think the idea that the workbook is sufficient to produce a workable CFP case study, having read it and read through it and had a look, is nonsensical. I mean, I'd seen more so than that. I'd seen anonymized shared versions of different case studies that had passed. People had been kind enough to share those with me. Not my case study. I'd very deliberately checked with people previously, because I know there are only a small number of case studies, and I really didn't want there to be any question that I might be, plagiarizing. I think it's very important. But so I had seen other people's work, and I felt mine was of a similar quality. And so I was really stuck with what the issue was. So yeah, definitely some anger there. And but then, once you can get over the shock, the structure of the feedback is very thorough, and the feedback's given learning outcome by learning outcome. What doesn't come out there very well is that the learning outcomes are so deeply connected that actually very often the fixing one thing can fix everything.
Yes.
And so that kind of came out in between the second and third submission, but I'm skipping ahead there. But I'm sure we'll get onto it. So yeah, but once I got over all of that, I did some soul searching. I rang a few people, yourself included. I thought, you know what, actually there's some scope here to make something workable, but I'm going to have to start from scratch. I'm going to have to bin what I've done, and I'm going to have to pretend I never made that first submission. And I managed to get on Steve's course this time.
Yep.
And Steve's course is, it's excellently delivered. It's mostly a spreadsheet building course.
Yes.
Because Steve's view is that the most reliable way to pass is to build a plan the way, effectively, I guess, that CFP plans have always been built over the years. Steve has a lot of experience in sort of training people in the CFP. So I kind of ate a load of humble pie. I sat and did the course. I built the spreadsheet, and I rebuilt the plan from scratch. And this time I took the advice my own advice largely, that I should have taken at first, and I made every single learning outcome a heading that needed something underneath it.
Okay.
So learning outcome 1.1.1 is the client's attitude towards saving and debt determined. And so there is a heading that says your attitude to savings and debt. And then, 1.1.2 is the impact of changes in income expenditure assessed, and so on. So there was a point to answer for every single learning outcome in the second model. And
okay.
I thought, if I can't hand, there is no way I can hand those potential marks on any nicer a plate to the examiner if I do it that way.
And so roughly how long did that process take you? Another 60 hours again, if you were kind of starting?
Probably more. Probably more, because including the time of Steve's course, which is 3 days. Yeah. It was probably another 3 to 4 weekends work, I would guess. That second submission, I think, was about 18,000 words. So it's a good old chunk of text. Yeah. That includes all the table contents and everything.
Yes.
So, yeah, 18,000 on the second submission.
And so between versions 1 and 2, was your brain kind of going to different places, thinking about different results, different options for the client along the way? Or did you think, actually, I'm basically just kind of retrospectively recreating what Voyant had done?
No, I don't think so, actually. And I think I'd suffered from a fundamental misunderstanding of what the CFP was testing. And that was, I wanted to kind of demonstrate my competence and capabilities as a practitioner. I imagined a client coming in and seeing me, and me sitting down and saying, these are the sort of issues that are going to affect you. And the CFP at its core is a sort of a future discounting exercise. And it's about allocating today's funds in a verifiable way to the pounds and pence to fix this, that, and the other goal. Yeah. A good example is, one of the feedback in the first one was I'd identified a protection gap, and I'd rounded the protection recommendation up to the nearest £10,000 because it's just neater, rather than saying you should buy life insurance for £272,352.83 or whatever. You round it up to a round number. And that had actually been pulled up as one of the issues. No justification has been given for this amount.
because you're slightly over-insuring, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so it was this this realization, I suppose, by the second submission, that actually, this is a hard and fast exercise in allocation of assets.
Yeah.
Stop trying to apply a practitioner. And whilst I think it absolutely has improved my my thinking as a practitioner, it doesn't test that specifically. That's a side effect of the way that the CFP is structured.
It's kind of like going through the mangle, I guess, isn't it? Where you come out a lot slimmer in the other end, but it's still a painful experience going through the middle.
Yeah, absolutely.
So after spending, what we're adding it up roughly, we're looking at 150 plus hours in total so far on your plan. Then you submitted your second submission, and then what happened?
Yeah, so second submission went in. In fact, I just checked, by the way. So I submitted the first one in August 2020, so I did pretty much start it straight after the exam.
Yeah.
The second submission went in December. That must have been February 2021. I've got the date wrong. Yeah, so in February 21, and it was a narrow fail. So it came back, the candidate has put in a significant amount of work in the previous submission, but there's still these issues, and there were a series of issues, and effectively they all, they mostly were short, easy fixes, but because of this flow through the planning. One of the key issues that I won't let go, even though because of the power dynamic, you just have to fix it. The examiner disagreed with my assumptions on life expectancy. So I'd reasoned them, and I would argue that they were reasonable, but they just didn't agree with it. So they said, I personally, if you like, don't think it's reasonable that working to age 95, which is what I used. Yeah. It makes sense in this case. Something beyond 95 would be reasonable without clarification given. So that effectively meant that whole other elements in the plan couldn't work.
Yeah,
because there's 5 years of unknown, if you like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one of the issues that other people have said about the feedback, is that when they get their feedback, they can see what the problem is. And then when they start fixing it, actually it is having a knock-on effect because of that cascade effect through the plan. It's having a knock-on effect somewhere else, which then means you can't just leave that other bit alone. You're then kind of off down a rabbit hole of fixing all sorts of other different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like whack-a-mole, basically. And it comes back to that, this image in my head of a spider's web, right? Because you go, okay, well, I'll come over here and I'll fix that, but it pulls everything else out of kilter. What I would say is, and perhaps something that isn't immediately obvious, but your second submission and onwards has a previously passed section for certain learning outcomes.
Yes.
And as far as I'm aware, that pretty much isn't reversible. You'll know better than me, Becky. But the point is that in some senses, if you're worried about things being moved on, I think that's I probably worried too much about it, because actually, if those areas have been previously passed, they're not then subsequently going to fail on a future submission.
That's right. Once you've passed an area, you can't then be failed on it later on,
yes.
which is something it's very important actually for other people embarking on the process or in the middle of it at the moment right now, to remember, because it can, I've come across other people that I've been supporting along the way, and they've spent quite a significant number of extra hours fixing those extra bits. And it's this dichotomy of, when you read the whole plan, there's a bit that's kind of a bit wonky because it was passed on the previous assessment. But obviously what you're doing changes it. But actually you don't actually need to change that bit. So you do need to be quite careful with the bits when you're redoing parts, that it flows through still nicely into the other bits, even though you don't need to kind of rework the whole of those other sections if you pass them.
Yeah, absolutely. and I think I probably spent too long on the third submission with that in mind.
So roughly, now we're up to 150 hours, roughly thereabouts. How long, again, roughly, do you think that you spent on that third submission?
I did it within the resubmission period. So there's a kind of a short and a long resubmission period.
Yeah, there's a rapid window, isn't there? Yeah, a couple of weeks, I think it is, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but in the sort of ongoing saga of the CISI messing things up, my exam feedback from the examiner had been corrupted. So they sent me a half blank piece of feedback and said, look, we're really sorry, we don't have the full one yet. We need to go back to the examiner. So I got a bit of an extension, but I'd say it was probably another 5 days work. I took a long weekend basically and took a couple of days
my word.
in the office. But on and off, I mean, this is the thing, right? It's doing a bit, going back, go and do something else, coming back to it, doing a bit more, going back, doing something else. That's how I tend to work best. So It wasn't 5 solid days of work.
No.
But it was probably another few hours. The final word count was 20,000, almost exactly, on the third submission. The spreadsheet proliferated and turned into a full financial, full lifetime financial model, complete with index that's fully click-aroundable, just because that's the kind of geek I am, really. But the approach was the same again, really. It's tempting, I think, just to go through the learning outcomes one by one and go, right, I'll fix that. But I think it's actually worth considering. There's a sensible order to do the planning in. So each of the case studies has a special need, which should always be the first priority. Then retirement planning, then estate planning, and then financial protection, because I guess in that order, each has less of an impact on the others as you go down that list. And so coming back to resubmission, following that order again in terms of fixing the problems, I think is going to minimise that issue of things affecting other things. Yeah.
And what I found in the past is that sometimes the client will say in the case study, protection is probably their most important thing, or their top priority, and people tend to charge off and fix that first when protecting the existing income stream. But actually, that is the income stream as we stand today before you've spent any money on anything, achieving any objectives. So what the reality is that you end up revisiting it twice. You do it right at the start of the plan and then again at the end of the plan, which a lot of people just don't realise. I think it's important to kind of think through your process. And actually also, I think important, I don't know whether you found this, that I found that some things can, by fixing one thing, your feedback, 2 or 3 or 4 bits of feedback kind of go away. They automatically fix themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And myself being a prime example, because this issue of age of modelling, it almost certainly could have been that I'd have just fixed that. A couple of other small fixes, and then I could have submitted it and not spent much on it. But I at this point I was in what I felt was to be a bit of a siege with the examiner, and so I was definitely going to prepare my final volley, as thoroughly as I could. The armies were being commanded as far as I was concerned. So, and
I think that's the other thing to remember, is that your case study assessment is going back to the same assessor each time too. So I guess, like in your situation, if you don't feel that they are kind of understanding what's going on and why you've taken the approach, or, just fundamentally, as you said, disagree, then, there's potential for more upset and more conflict there, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. But on the other hand, I suppose you're getting consistency. I think it would be very frustrating if you had one examiner mark a submission and then resubmitted and had someone totally new look at it. I think that could cause all sorts of headaches.
Yeah. And I think on balance, you're right. I think on balance, it's better to go back to the same sort of person, because you don't want somebody else who's kind of looks at it differently. And I think my experience of being an assessor myself, the assessors, we all had our favourite bits. For me, it was assumptions, as you well know. But I'd always look very deeply at the assumptions. The first thing that I would do when I got anybody's plan. But I guess, the reality is that as financial planners, as we all were at the time, then we're all perhaps we have all slightly different specialisms and, our kind of favorite areas, which I guess that's kind of what makes us all different, but good financial planners. But obviously in this environment, it can be reflected out in perhaps some more subjective feedback that you receive, definitely. So let's move on then. You sent in your third and final assessment attempt and then passed.
Yep. And passed with 96% in the end, which I was quite pleased with. The kind of the journey up the mountain, if you like, from 32% for the first result, 54% for the second, and 96% for the third. Really did feel like I'd beaten the CFP by the first submission.
Definitely. And so now you've had, obviously more than a few months to reflect on the whole process. Do you think it has, we talked about, that going through the mangle phase. Do you think going through that phase has helped you in your business day to day and helped the advice, by way of, qualitative advice or structure of the way that you give advice to your clients?
That's a really good question, and one that we've reflected on a bit in the office. As I say, I went through the process with a co-director. He passed on his second attempt, and I passed on my third. We felt that it ratified a lot of what we were doing in terms of approach, so that was useful. That's what we'd set out to do. Certain areas, certainly in for example, assumptions. One actual business outcome it led to was for us to sit down and put together a proper, house assumptions document that describes what assumptions we make, why, where the evidence is for them, and in what circumstances we might change them. So that's a very specific outcome from it that's been helpful. We've restructured our risk profiling output as a result as well. So we run our own in-house risk profiler. We've never bought a third party's because we've never thought they did what we wanted them to. And that means that I was able to build in what's quite a nice and not really one that's drawn out from certainly the commercial software that's available currently. But our risk profiler now follows the sort of short-term, medium-term, long-term model that the CFP does. Yeah. So it becomes a much more general risk profile exercise that we can then apply to different portfolios rather than, as traditionally you go, well, with regards to this money only, what are we going to do with it, sort of thing. So again, that was another pleasant outcome. I suspect it's changed the way I think. It's probably changed the way that I approach issues a little bit, and it's made me feel able to challenge, interestingly, and not something that really came out immediately, but we're better at challenging the outputs that the commercial cash flow software give us. Right. In the sense that, we've effectively now built our own, or I've built my own. Yeah. And so I can challenge some of those outputs a little bit better than I might have done previously.
And from a client's point of view, do you think it has changed their experience at all?
Possibly not so much as some of your other guests, and I suspect that's because, if you like,
you're already doing financial planning.
We were already there.
Yeah,
exactly. And so my journey into financial planning had been via basically. Almost certainly the CFP was involved in it, but not directly. I was learning from others who were showing me a different way of working, and I was picking that up. With the CFP was the culmination of that, really, rather than the start of it for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting, depending on where you are on your professional journey and kind of who you've bumped into and spoken to, and your general attitude, I think, for meeting people and kind of rolling your sleeves up and challenging them and, asking, well, why did you do it differently? And why did you do it that way? And all that kind of things. I guess we all do that differently, don't we? So the CFP gets picked up at different points on that journey.
Yeah, definitely. It was definitely a benefit, I guess, for it to have been, to pick it up just after it had been modernised, and brought to a level 7 qualification, which makes it unique in the financial services sort of education space. It was nice to be able to have achieved a level 7 qualification in some ways. Yes. I think there's a little bit of lethargy that comes to, functionally from a qualification framework, it being equivalent to the charter qualification that I've spent, years in the past doing. You go, well, what's the incentive? What's the personal development incentive to going and taking it? So it's quite nice that you then, you're able to go up a level in terms of qualifications, if you like.
Yeah. And I think it certainly sounds like it's benefited, both you personally, but also your business and your clients ultimately. That's what we're all here for at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And so just reflecting on all of that journey that you've had, we know that we've got some people who are in the middle of, perhaps resubmitting one of their submissions at the moment. We've got other people who are about to, hopefully very soon, to get their exam results, and then we'll be embarking on the process. So knowing what you know as a recent success candidate for the level 7, what advice would you give to those people?
If I was to go back in time and talk to myself, there's a phrase that gets used a lot in the kind of martial arts and combat sports world, and that is leave your ego at the door. And I think that is have been very helpful for me at the start of the process, because I think having done a decade of professional exams and thinking, I know how to do this, I'm comfortable within this, I'm in my comfort zone, I don't need to I don't need to worry too much about this being too different. It is totally different from any other assessment style that I've undergone as a professional, and much more challenging in terms of the application of that.
Yeah.
So I think that would be the first thing. Just leave any expectations you've got about what exams look like. The second would be, don't think that reading the workbook is sufficient, because it isn't. The workbook is a starting point, but without some sort of third-party support, people can do it, and clearly they have without third-party support. But I was at the point, having been on Steve's course, and I know there are other sort of coaching and courses available now. The difference in how I approached the exam was just night and day. So not only that, but there was a whole load of sort of technical understanding of how it's going to be examined that you can't find anywhere else. What I would say is Steve teaches one way to pass the CFP, and I think I know there are multiple, because I've seen submissions that have passed that have, for example, used commercial cash flow software, but I think you're making it harder for yourself if you do. No matter what the CISI sort of officially says, it is now possible to do it with it. That's one of those things that's kind of technically true, but not necessarily the wisest approach.
So swat up on your spreadsheet skills if you feel that you might be lacking them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that is funny actually, because that is a key factor, and one of the challenges on the course was people who were struggling with their own use of Excel, because what the course doesn't do is provide you with an Excel spreadsheet to use. It shows you how to put one together, but there's quite a bit of assumed knowledge there that some of the less technically capable people on the course were struggling with.
Yeah. But once you've done your kind of groundwork and preparation, then for you felt it obviously was achievable, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely, and it doesn't take 3 submissions and wanting to go and jump off a cliff in the middle of it to get there for everybody. It was a particularly extreme process for me, and I'm glad it was in some ways. It was it was useful learning for me about myself, so that was helpful. But also it's a case of hear about others' mistakes hear about my mistakes so that you don't make them. Go and talk to people that have done, particularly the recent one that's changed quite a bit from the previous. Speak to people like me, speak to anybody else who's done it, find out what they did. A great example, one piece of advice that Steve gave that, should be written in bold in, 50-point text at the front of the workbook. Don't start writing your report until you finish your spreadsheet.
Yeah.
I'm sure collectively thousands of hours could have been saved from people paying attention to that advice or hearing that advice.
Yeah.
You don't put one letter on the piece of paper until you've got your models built. Those sorts of practical help.
Yeah, absolutely. Alasdair, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and being so honest about all of the ups and downs of getting through your CFP. But I guess the most important thing is that, as you said, you learned things about yourself along the way, but hopefully it will benefit your clients and your business in the long run, becoming a certified financial planner. So thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Just one more thing, actually, Jackie, if I can.
Sure.
One of the side benefits and funnily enough, one of the reasons I really wanted to get it was that you get access, once you're a CFP, to the international CFP community. Now, I'm not sure how well known that is in the UK, but there's a fantastic, and the associate membership or the international membership isn't very expensive. And you get access to the academic journal and to sort of this big community of international CFPs. That's another tip. Once you've got it, go and find that, because that's really interesting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be delving around in building good relationships with other CFPs around the world in other podcasts coming up shortly. So, there's nearly 200,000 certified financial planners around the world now, all willing to share their experiences and help you along the way. It's great if you've got clients in other countries that you want to partner with other CFPs.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, thank you for having me. It's been a good one. And like I say, if anybody does want to hear in a bit more detail or chat about the complications and the ways to get through it, I'm always happy to help. I'm on Twitter and email and all those usual things.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you, Alasdair, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. It's quite interesting to listen to the different views and discussions with different people, isn't it? Join me next time when we'll be discussing all things certified financial planner related and catching up with those new to the financial planning profession. Bye for now.